It's always the preference not to relocate a building, but we have several in Florissant that have been relocated.
The property was donated to us when Lowell Girardier, a local builder, wanted to develop what is known as Block 33 up near the water tower. There was this one house there that was going to be destroyed, and Rosemary Davison, one of our most noted local historians, said she would like it moved, and she talked Mr. Girardier into doing that, which was one of Rosemary's strong suits. And so we, Old Town Partners and Valley of Flowers, came to use this house as their base of operations.
The house was originally built around 1860, and from 1860 for about 70 years, the Missouri French style of house was a dominant type of style in the city of Florissant. And that's what really made up the grid, is homes of this kind. There are many examples in Old Town. This was one of about 70 or so that were fine examples that were able to be saved.
The house is a Missouri French colonial. Generally speaking, what denotes that style is the vertical nature of the siding on the outside. The siding goes up and down vertically as opposed to a horizontal siding. The French, when they were building here, that was one of the things that denoted French. They would build houses vertical. So a log cabin, instead of being horizontal logs, would be vertical logs.
The unique characteristic of this one is the brick nogging.
Interior and exterior walls had bricks inside of them, and so it made it for a fairly strong house.
The framing of the building was about 4 foot on center. So what material takes up the place? Well, they were looking for a material that was indestructible or impenetrable and had some benefit for the building. So if you put brick and mortar in between the framing members, it not only holds the heat and re-radiates it just like a brick house at night, but it's also a durable material. It's also a fireproof material. It also doesn't allow the mice to get into the walls because it's full of bricks. So that's what brick nogging is.
In 1878, when they first recorded it, was only 2 rooms. The 2 rooms we have right here is where we're sitting, was the house. When the Kujats moved in, they added on approximately 4 other rooms. There was which is very, very typical of this area. Houses started very small and then they added on as families expanded, and the Cujots had a family of 6 that were living in the house at that time. So they needed more room than just the 2 rooms. This was a very ordinary house. This was very typical of the houses that were in Florissant at that time, of the French settlers that came here.
And that's why it was preserved. It was one of the homes that was of the French style, and it was relocated to a place that had been the residence of many of the original homes in Florissant. Although the house has many additions, none of the additions detract from that French colonial style. And so since it was a good example of that style, it was relocated to this place and saved. Framing members were usually in particular lengths, and that's what determined the size of the building and its character, really. The original structure was frame on the outside and probably plaster on the inside. So the interior that you see now is a more modern wood interior, but the roof and ceiling construction is full 2x construction. In other words, not nominal 2x, but the timbers above our head here is probably a full 2-inch by 8-inch floor framing members for the attic above, or for the second story.
We work here a lot. The fact that we can be here, this house is nearing 150 years old, and something that was actually built 150 years ago was still standing and still being very productive, although it's being used more as an office space as opposed to a residence. But it's a pretty big kick to be able to work in something like this, and it's a very comfortable house. Hard to believe it's 150 years old, because it's the setting of where we're at here, the house just fits in so well. It looks like it could be new construction made to look old, but it's not. It's old construction that we have maintained. we're very fortunate to have enough of an endowment that we can maintain the house. This past summer, we noticed that the porch was starting to disintegrate in some place. There were some holes in the floors, and so we basically stripped all the paint off of it, put in new wood wherever it needed to be, because that porch is original to the house. It's 150 years old. And we repainted it all, of course, in the appropriate colors of the period. So you just feel a little bit of responsibility, and it's not a difficult responsibility. In the last couple years, we've added a community garden that's really not a part of Old Town Partners, but the community garden has been established to the side here, and I think that's an outstanding use of the property. This is sort of a floodplain. This is not an area that we really could ever develop or build anything more on than a community garden. So we're very excited about that. This property, where we lay here, is part of the Spanish land grant. At the time, I've learned in researching this that there were homes up in the grid, up in the 10 by 10 grid up there, and those folks had gardens down here. They had long strips of land that extended from here all the way out to the Missouri River. So they had access to water and that sort of thing. So it's interesting that we're able, this community garden has come in, and that's exactly the way the property was used prior to this. So that's exciting to see those types of things happen. It's wonderful. It's special to preserve these types of properties. It's difficult at times. There are many properties around here that have been preserved with a lot of effort. Whenever we initially moved here, we talked to many of the homeowners that were developing or caring for their properties, and it's a 40-year endeavor, a 40 or 50-year endeavor, constantly finding things and doing things and improving the property. And it's very much worth it. It's very useful, it's very interesting to know the history and what is going on in the area. And I enjoy learning about that, learning about how people lived at that particular time. And that's meaningful to me.
The historic nature of this building, though, is the original tie to John Mellanthius. It's the only building in St. Louis County that has a tie to John Mellanthius.
John Mellanthius came to St. Louis in 1804 and acquired this property in 1805. It started out as 2 rooms in a log cabin with a dog trot in the middle, and has grown into a 22-room home, and gave it to his daughter as a gift around 1817 when she was married. So that is when really a family started living here. Well, John Mellanthius was a fascinating man. Before they came to St. Louis, they lived in Philadelphia and went to Baltimore for a while. He was in Baltimore at this time, the siege of Fort McHenry. So he was defending Fort McHenry when the British were attacking and the Star-Spangled Banner was written. So he had a penchant for being at places at the right time when things were popping. John Mellanthius was he acquired land, but his great feat was in the War of 1812. He joined General Jackson in fighting the British at the Battle of New Orleans, and he had the inside track on when the war was over. In the meantime, he had bought cotton along the Mississippi River at very low price, at 4 cents a pound, and knew the war was over before anyone else did, since he was there at the battle, and went back up the river and got all his cotton, shipped it to England, and sold it for 40 cents a pound, and became a multimillionaire overnight.
The original Spanish land grant was about 340 acres.
And the school district, Ferguson-Florissant School District, was expanding at the time, and they wanted to acquire it, and they were going to tear down this building.
The property had been a farm land and run as a farm for 140 years. And that's when the R2 school district made an offer for 20 of the acres. And then finally in 1960, when the construction of McClure High School, they needed to relocate the house. And that's why the relocation was completed and the fundraiser was conducted.
And so a group of people got together and worked with the school district to preserve it.
Now in 1960, Florissant Valley Historical Society were able to raise $10,000 at that time to relocate the structure.
But at that time, this building, this Tide Noyer, was facing what is now Highway 270, where the gym is today of McClure High School.
The relocation of the building in 1960 would have required someone to crawl under the structure and dig it out and put supports under these large timbers, and therefore they were able to lift the entire structure to relocate it a couple of hundred yards to the south and kind of cant it to the west a little bit.
By 1960, it became the property of the Florissant Valley Historical Society.
The building is clapboard siding, and it's all built around these two original log structures, siding and wood porches. There are period balcony and porch railings. It's interesting to note that if you come onto the front porch, which I would call the west porch, it looks as if the front door is right in the center of the porch, but that's actually the entrance to what would have been the dog trot area between the two log cabins. So as you walk up the center rails between the columns, that's the dog trot area, and then you have a log structure to your left and right. The public entrance is on one of the later additions, I think in the 1830s, south addition, and that's also framed. But that's a deep porched area with the 16-foot columns. The French influence had the long gabled roofs that protected the additions. The orientation of the building is very important in the French architecture. With the deep porches, they're often oriented west and south to protect from the sun and to bring in the cross breeze from the prevailing winds from the southwest. The interior were originally finished off with plaster and lath over the log structures, and you can see an example of that in the space. They have uncovered some of it and left it intact so people will know what old-time construction was about. Later additions were upstairs, second story. There's a long room that was divided into 2 bedrooms and a bath between them.
Some of the comments that I've heard is how big it is, and it has 22 rooms, and it was continuously built on to accommodate the large family that lived here, and so people are astounded at how big it is. It is kind of out of the way, so you don't see it immediately unless you come up onto the school grounds, but we have had a tremendous resurgence of interest since the 250 cakes have been placed around St. Louis for the centennial this year. They had no idea what was in here, especially young people. They're not used to being in such an expansive area, and they're just pretty much astounded by it. The furnishings reflect all of the years that this house was occupied for way over 150 years. So that's kind of amazing, I think. The area is very generous, and to be able to preserve a building like this and to still have so many people take pride in its upkeep is very rewarding. I love history, and we have a great amount of history in this small area of Florissant that I think people would be really surprised to see how rich of a history we have.
I didn't know it was here through growing up. I grew up in St. Charles County, and I didn't know this home existed. So once it was acquired by the Florissant Historical Society, it opened to the public eventually, and as a younger woman, my mother and I came to tour the house. So that's when I got a little sense of pride, and just I'm so happy that it was preserved for my children and grandchildren and for everyone in our area to see what life was like.
The property was built in 1878 by a company called Fruin Construction Company. It was built as the last depot of the narrow gauge railroad. The railroad ran from Olive and Grand downtown, 16 miles, and the final destination stop was Florissant. The building originally sat at the intersection of St. Ferdinand and St. Catherine Streets. It was at the end of the line. It cost 75 cents for people to ride this round trip from here down to Olive and Grand and back, or vice versa. And the narrow gauge railroad was really the precursor to the Metrolink today. And Florissant was very anxious to get the train out here. Now, if the city planners and the councilmen thought it was going to increase the population of Florissant, it didn't. Population didn't grow during the time that the narrow gauge and then eventually the electrified train ran here, but it did bring people into Florissant to shop, to worship, to escape the heat of the city, to view our beautiful colors in October. So people who lived in St. Louis came here. It was described in the papers as a Rip Van Winkle city and a quaint little French town. Because even though we were only 16 miles from the heart of the city, back before automobile traffic, 16 miles was a long way. So we were really separated and segregated from the city. The narrow gauge helped bridge that gap and allowed us to communicate more with our friends in St. Louis.
The previous owners, I know there was a candy store here. I know that there was an Irish gift shop for a short period of time. The Chamber of Commerce, I believe, actually had the building for the majority of the time that was actually in this particular location. It was also a visitor center. That's what it was originally brought down here for, and renovated and reopened as that. This building's been through a lot. I know a car ran through right where I'm sitting. A young man was across the street, hit the gas instead of the brake, came across the street and through this area right here. So it was obviously had to be reconstructed and was replicated to match the rest of the building. It's not really that visible. If you look closely, you can tell some of the boards are newer than some of the other ones. But as far as that goes, they did a great job on fixing that and making it match. I found some of these old prints that you'll see hanging on the wall. I also found this color that you see under many, many layers of paint, and was one of the reasons that I actually chose this color. Doorknobs, door handles that were obviously from the late 1800s, early 1900s, things that I've repurposed. You know, one of the best things is I occasionally get people that come in and tell me that when they were a kid they used to sweep the floors of Berkey's, which was Berkey's was a store that was originally in this building, but it was down the street before they ever moved it. I did have one lady that was, I believe, 96 years old who came here on her birthday that had actually ridden the train, and she was recanting stories of that when she was a little girl. And you know, that's pretty neat. That's one of the things that attracted me to the building. You know, I like that people come in, they don't just come in for the food. They come in for the food, but you also get the history of the building, and you don't get that everywhere. You know, I could go into a brand new place and, you know, you don't have those stories. You know, there's this building to go from a train station in the late 1800s to a cheesecake bakery, cafe, restaurant. You know, that's one of the neatest things, to repurpose something and keep it going. When I originally took over the building, it needed a lot of work. I believe all of us, especially if you're going to live in this community, that you should, you know, take care of it. And you know, that's my goal, is to not just have a successful business here, but also maintain the property, make it look nice. And you notice the things that we've done around here, and outside and inside. I think it's made this corner look really, really nice. And I think that's my responsibility. I mean, you know, I really want to see this around for another, you know, as long as I'm around, but be nice if it's here in another 130 years. And the only way that's going to happen is if people like myself take care of it. It's so important to take care of those things in your community, so that the kids can see you know, when you could tell everybody about, you know, what it used to be. And it's a learning experience. I often say that it's like, you know, I'm like the historian of the building. When people come in, are constantly asking me questions.
October 1st, 1878 was the first train that pulled into the station. That train held dignitaries and notable people from the area who were responsible for the narrow gauge railroad getting up and running. The building was moved in 1967, and it was actually moved twice. It was moved because they were widening St. Ferdinand Road, and where the narrow gauge sat, or where the train depot sat, it sat where the road was going to be expanded. So they had to get it off of there so that they could expand the road.
The building's on the National Historic Register, but is not in its original location. It's one of the examples in Florissant of relocating to preserve landmark property. And there are many examples in Florissant, but this is one of them, and it was actually relocated a couple of times. Its significance is really tied to the exterior materials and the train station vernacular architecture that it is constructed from. The exterior elements that are notable on the outside are its board and batten vertical siding. And the unique part of it is that the northwest corner of the roof is cropped off or trimmed because of its original location. Its original location as a station was on a circular turnaround for the narrow gauge railroad. And the corner overhang would have interfered with the train, so the building roof was trimmed in order to allow the train to make its circle. The building was originally yellow ochre color paint on the outside, but it has, after its restoration, it was painted fluorescent red, which they call it. It's a red color that many of the buildings in the historic district are painted.
Joe Shark, a local businessman, agreed to allow it temporarily to be moved to his property, which was right by Fountain Creek, butting up to Fountain Creek by the bridge going over to Old St. Ferdinand Shrine. It sat there temporarily until the city had a place for it. It was a dilapidated, old, falling down building, and they didn't want to wake up in the morning, look out their front door and see it. So it found its place here. It moved up the street here to property that was owned by the city of Florissant. Preservation is important because it is our connection to the past.
I think history, it says, you know, it defines who we are. I think that it's important to preserve, you know, the history of historic Florissant. You know, if they would have destroyed this and it would never be here, I would never be at this location.
We can read a book, we can listen to people's stories, but to actually have the ability to walk the same floors that our predecessors walked, it's a more tactile experience, a way to experience the history of Florissant.